Welcome to Insight, Purpose, and Perspective, the podcast where we have insightful discussions on purpose about today's current affairs and topics viewed from a Christian perspective.
Feelings, but whatever. I was just scrolling through my feed and I saw a couple of posts about how white people have no culture. And I'm just over this white guilt, white shame type stuff. I'm not advocating for white supremacy. I'm just advocating the end of white silence and the end of white guilt and the end of white shame, because our culture participated in nothing that your culture hadn't participated in previously. We didn't start slavery, but we damn sure ended it. And the only place that slavery still exists are in people of color societies in Africa and the Middle East. The Vikings figured out how to circumnavigate the globe before the Islamic world ever figured out how to get their feet wet. It wasn't us that was going into Africa and pulling the slaves out. It was other Africans grabbing them and enslaving them. We invented democracy. We invented the constitutional republic. The bubonic plague wiped out half of Europe. And what did we do? We got together and discovered Western medicine and inoculations and vaccines. I'm not saying that we're better than you, but we're damn sure not worse. There are four major ethnic groups in this planet. There are black people, white people, Asian people, and Hispanic people. And we are the smallest. And we are the only group that you're demanding shut up. And because we're not doing it anymore, you're just going to scream racist louder and louder and louder. And we are done caring. We are not better than you, but we're damn sure no worse. And if we're so freaking terrible, then why? Why does the entire Eastern world flock to countries that we created? Answer me that.
Can you hear me now? And I've been talking for almost 10 minutes. Man. Well, thank y'all for let me go back then, because I did a lot of talking and y'all didn't hear half of what I said, you know. Well, where do we start? We'll go back at the beginning. The reason why this conversation matters. White guilt isn't just a feeling, it's a social force, and it shapes how people talk, what they won't say, what they pretend to believe, what they do to keep from being judged. I'm not going to go and play the video again, because I'm hoping that you heard that. Yeah. I'm gonna put this up. It's my brother, Deacon Sadadrian. Yes, finally. Okay. Everybody got a good laugh out of that one. I'm laughing too. I love it when technology works, and I even love it when it doesn't. But thank goodness for people who hold me accountable and help me with this thing. One time I did this one time before. I talked for almost 12 minutes. Did the whole podcast, because it was like 12 or 15 minutes, and nobody could hear me, and I didn't have anybody watching, so nobody could say, "Hey, Bunbury, your microphone's not working." you know. But look, today we're going to define what people mean by white guilt, where it comes from, how it shows up, and then I'm going to say I'm going to lay out some pros and cons for white Americans and for black Americans, because this topic impacts both, whether you like it or not. Now, I want to be upfront. Guilt and responsibility are not the same thing. Guilt is an emotion. Responsibility is action. And if you don't separate these two, you'll get stuck in cycles that don't heal anybody. So let me go back over the definitions for the different types of guilt. And I'm just going to go through these briefly. Personal guilt is, I feel bad because I'm white and racism exists. The second one is inherited guilt. I feel responsible for what my ancestors or my nation did. Now, this one's kind of complicated because, can you inherit guilt? Or can you inherit responsibility? Are you morally accountable for something you personally didn't do? So that's some little wiggle room in there. So we're going to come back to that. But social pressure guilt. This one, I feel like I have to say the right things, post the right things, endorse the right things, or I'll be labeled a racist. Yeah, this is what some of our white brothers and sisters are going through. You know, number 4 is performative guilt. This one says, "Let me publicly display my guilt so people know I'm one of the good ones." Uh, and performative guilt is not repentance. It's not moral courage. It's often, they're just trying to manage their image so that, like I said, they don't look like what they might really be. You know. So I'm not going to say this, and I want to say this carefully. A person can acknowledge injustice and care about it deeply without being trapped in the guilt identity. And a person can claim guilt loudly while changing nothing. So white guilt can be a doorway to empathy or a trap that produces resentment or fear or fake relationships. So, look, the reason we need to talk about this honestly is because when guilt becomes the center of the conversation, it usually leads to two unhealthy outcomes. Number one, the guilty person becomes the main character, and the real problems, never get addressed. They become secondary. So, again, we're going to go into the history. Um, Slavery, Jim Crow, redlining, housing discrimination, segregation, unequal access in many systems. All of these things really happened in our history, and they happened to our people, and they have had an effect. And you don't have to agree on every solution, political solution, to admit that this history is real. But at the same time, we have to admit that something else that people don't like to say out loud. Most people alive today didn't personally create these historical systems, and many people today are trying to live decent lives, raise families, work hard, pay their bills, and just be honorable. So the question becomes, how do you tell the truth about history without turning living individuals into permanent defendants? Let me say that one more time. How do you tell the truth about history without turning living individuals into permanent defendants? Because if you turn the average person into a permanent defendant, two things happen. They either become submissive performers or they become resentful rebels. And neither one of those is healthy. Now, here's where the white guilt often enters. It's the emotional attempt to reconcile two realities. My nation did wrong, and I want to be a good person. So guilt becomes the bridge, sometimes a healthy bridge, sometimes a collapsing bridge. So here's the thing: guilt versus shame versus responsibility. Now, let's separate those. Let me see, the truth hurts. That's right, brother. Truth hurts. Definitely hurts. But like the scriptures say, the truth will set you free. That's for sure. And we got to talk about the truth. We can't sugarcoat this thing and not address some of these things. But we don't want to make people, like I said, let's go back to guilt versus shame versus responsibility. Guilt says I did something wrong, and it's about an action or a failure. Shame says I am wrong, and it's identity based, it's corrosive, it's destructive. Responsibility says, here's what I will do now. It's forward moving, it produces outcomes. So a healthy conscience can feel guilt and then move to responsibility. But when guilt turns into shame, especially inherited shame, people begin to act strange. And that's where we're seeing some of that kind of stuff. They over apologize, they self censor themselves, they do social rituals to prove they're safe. They become anxious in honest conversations. They start treating relationships like a minefield, and if we want to get past some of these things that have happened in the history of our country and the things that have happened to our people, We have to have open dialogue with white people, and not to make them feel bad, you know, or because sometimes it's like, okay, we suffered, so I want you to feel my pain. Well, that's not realistic because we can't make them slaves, even though some people might want to, but we can't do that. And we don't want, and you really don't want to, because who wants to be? Slavery was a terrible thing. And it's terrible no matter who's being enslaved. It just so happened that our people were enslaved for a long period of time. And shame has this nasty side effect. It doesn't just punish the person who feels it. It also warps relationships because shame makes people dishonest. Now, I'm going to tell you the truth. A society cannot be stable if it runs on inherited shame. You can teach history, you can demand fairness, you can insist on equal dignity. However, here's the balance. A society also cannot be stable if it runs on denial. If people pretend the past didn't happen, they also create conflict. So the path is neither inherited shame nor historical denial. The path is truth plus responsibility plus practical repair where it's needed. Yeah. Let me keep going. If everybody's picking up what I'm putting down, put a 1 in the comments. Let me know what if you agree, if you disagree. I want to hear from you and hear what you have to say. Now, what I've got next, guys, is I want to talk about the pros and cons for both white Americans and for Black Americans. If we're able to take this path of truth plus responsibility plus practical repair. So, pro number 1, white guilt can spark more reflection. Some people don't think about racial history or disparities until something pricks their conscience. So guilt can be a starting point that says, maybe I don't know as much as I think. Maybe I need to listen. Now, this is for my white friends, my white brothers and sisters. I want you to pay attention to this. Now, pro number 2, it can reduce your defensiveness and increase humility. When guilt is processed well, it can stop the reflex of everything is fine, you're exaggerating. Humility opens up real dialogue. Now, here are some of the cons. Now, it can become self-centered. This is the biggest one. The conversation turns into, look how guilty I feel, comfort me, approve me. Now, the whole moment becomes emotional caretaking for the guilty person. That's not what we want to do. Con number 2 is it creates performative activism. People learn the script. They say the right phrases, post the right times, denounce the right villains, signal purity, but behind the scenes, nothing changes. They're just performing. So now here's the pros and cons for my brothers and sisters, my Black Americans. Pro number 1, it can lead to acknowledgement and listening. For many Black Americans, a major frustration is being told it wasn't that bad, or that's in the past, or you're making it up. Well, that's not true. Some of this stuff is real. When white guilt pushes some people to stop minimizing and actually listen, that can be meaningful. Pro number 2 is it can lead to access and opportunity. When guilt turns into responsibility, it shows up as mentoring, advocacy, investing in education and neighborhoods, equal access to jobs and networks. Now, some of the cons are it often creates emotional labor. When white guilt is in the room, some Black people get assigned a role as teacher, therapist, judge, priest granting absolution. And that's exhausting. We don't need to be doing that. It's tough enough being Black, just being Black. We don't need the extra duty. One of the other cons is it produces a fragile allyship. Some allies, they're not committed to justice. They're just committed to being seen as good. So the relationship becomes, I'll support you as long as you reassure me and don't challenge me too much. You know, that's not solidarity, that's insecurity. So, so how can white guilt can get weaponized? And this is how it can get weaponized. Because I want to talk about this because I think this happens a lot among our people is we use this to as a weapon to harm white folks and to try to make them feel some of the disparity that we have felt and some of the discrimination and some of the racism that we do experience in these modern times. You know, it can be sometimes weaponized, but not enough that you need to recognize it. But here are a few common patterns. If you don't agree with me, you're a racist. A lot of people do that. So that shuts down the debate and that forces conformity. You know, and we don't have to agree with each other on everything. That's not the goal. Um, some people profit off of the guilt financially and socially. You know, So, there's trainings, there's consultings, there's content, political campaigns, corporate branding. All of these things can profit off of the guilt that's being put out there. Sometimes it's sincere work, sometimes it's guilt selling, you know. And then the most important thing, guilt as a distraction. If leaders can keep you emotionally activated, you don't ask hard questions about corruption, broken systems, policies that fail, who's actually benefiting. Now, we see this a lot in the political arena in our government. And I'm not naming any one politician over another. I think that a lot of them are guilty of this type of thing, trying to keep people distracted and not focusing on what's the real issues. The president gave his State of the Union address a couple of days ago. I don't know whether any of you watched it or not. I watched part of it because I think it was the longest State of the Union address in history of State of the Unions. But a couple of things that I noticed was that the two parties are so split in each other that they could not. He asked them to stand if they agreed with the statement that the government should take care of the citizens of this country first over illegal aliens. And of course, I didn't say it the same way he said it. He said it a different way, but that's what he meant. Is they should protect the citizens first. And, the Republicans got up, a majority of them did, and the Democrats didn't stand. And, he said, you ought to be ashamed of yourself. And I agree. If you can't stand up and agree on a statement like that, if you're in government, and especially these congressmen, men and women, you are elected officials. They're elected officials that we've elected to do for us, to make sure that we're taken care of. And they couldn't even stand up for a statement like that just because it was Donald Trump. Now I'm not a Donald Trump supporter, but right is right and wrong is wrong, no matter whose mouth it comes out of. But so if you care about justice, you should hate manipulation, and even when it's dressed up as virtue. So what's the better way? Here's the principle. Trade guilt rituals for responsible practices. For my white listeners, here's some practical steps. Tell the truth without self-hatred. You don't have to pretend history didn't happen, but you also don't have to adopt a shame identity. Replace performance with consistency. Quiet integrity beats loud guilt all the time. Build real relationships with us. Friendships require honesty, patience, and normal human interaction, not eggshells. Invest locally and personally. Mentor someone. Support a school. Join a community. Join a community work. Hire fairly. Build something. Reject both extremes, denial and self-flagellation. The future requires adults, not actors. Now, for my Black listeners, this requires we have to be required to have dignity, not pity. You don't need to be anyone's project. Set boundaries on emotional labor. It's okay to say, hey, I'm not your tutor today. Go read, learn, and come back respectful. Don't confuse guilt with loyalty. Someone can feel guilty and still be unreliable. Stay focused on outcomes. What strengthens communities long term is most important. Uh, Strong families, education, ownership, faith and moral foundation, safety and leadership. That's not selling out. Those things, that's what we call building. So let me give you some reflection prompts to start a real conversation. Uh, so when you talk about race, ask yourself, am I seeking truth or approval? Do I confuse guilt with virtue? Do I use guilt to control others or to avoid responsibility? The goal is truth, responsibility, and measurable repair. Well, that's pretty much all that I have for you guys today. Again, if you have been enjoying the content, make sure that you are uh, subscribing to the channel, Insight, Purpose, and Perspective. And we are always, don't want to miss out on my contents. Let me see what my brother says. White guilt is still white silence to me, but we can't invite them in all of our organizations neither. Well, no, that's not what I'm suggesting, brother. What I'm suggesting is that where we do interact with our white brothers and sisters, whether it's on the job, whether, wherever we deal with them, most of the time it's through work. And these conversations come up, uh, let's try to have an honest conversation and not let it be combative and not let it be where you're trying to make them feel bad for something that they didn't even participate in. Now, there's the other issue of white privilege. And I believe to a certain extent, yeah, there's some truth to that. I don't believe, and I think we've had this conversation before, I don't believe that um, white privilege is as powerful as some people want to make it out to be. I believe that anybody in this country, if you have strong desire and you have a plan, you can achieve almost anything you want because there are people who have done great things. Just last month when we were doing Black History, we showcased so many people that had tremendous success, and not just financing, but they elevated themselves. I remember like that one guy, what was it? His last name Black. He was one generation removed from slavery, and ended up building some of a lot of historical buildings right here in Winston-Salem, but all across the country. And he took something that was broken and made it into something beautiful and built a legacy behind it. There are some people, and that's the thing. If they're feeling guilty, let's talk about why they feel guilty. Because again, should they feel guilty about something that they didn't do, even though their ancestors perpetuated some of these crimes? But we could talk about atrocities all across history. And I'm not going to, the one that I always throw up against what happened to our people in this country is the Native Americans. Before the Europeans came to this country, they covered the continent. They were everywhere. And you talk about the slavery we endured, but even through all of that slavery, all of the atrocities that we endured as a people, we're still 13% of the population is African American, Black, people of color, whatever you want to call it. But the Native Americans represent less than 1%. And like I said, before the Europeans came to this country and started moving across it and occupying the land, they were everywhere. So let's talk, but they have been able to do great things for themselves and inside of these reservations and different things. I wouldn't say they leveled the playing field, but they've gathered themselves together and have some semblance of dignity and pride, and they're trying to maintain their cultural relevance and all of their wisdom and knowledge and history as well. So, but like I said, there's probably always going to be, you can't fix stupid. There's some folks who they're just going to be stupid. That's going all the way to the bone. You can't fix that. But what I'm proposing is that we have open dialogue, that we exchange ideas, so that we can repair some of this and not have people. We don't need to take sides. Let me show. A lot of black investors didn't have credit for a while, and we learned more about Thomas Edison than Lewis Latimer. Yeah, we did. We can always, when it comes to history, you know, uh, and just like what we did last month, we showcase people that nobody knew about because that stuff's not in the history books anywhere. But the information is out there. And again, we always encourage people to learn about your history. The first thing we talked about was go talk to your elders, people who your parents, your great grandparents, grandparents, and aunts and uncles, about people in your family who may have done significant things that nobody um, has written down anywhere in any history book. But it's still history because it's your family history and it's important, you know. Um, but again, like I said, my main point tonight with white guilt, guys, is that let's not use it as a weapon. Let's not try to beat our white brothers and sisters up with feeling guilty about what happened in this country during slavery times, during Jim Crow, during Reconstruction. These were terrible times for the country, and yeah, there were a lot of white folks who benefited from it, and it was just that's what it was. But we can't stay there, and we cannot or we should not use that as a wedge to keep us separated. You know, we live in a country where we're supposed to all be free, but freedom isn't free. It has a price, and people have paid a price. Coin and my brother. But at the end of the day, let's not stay separated. You know, separate but equal is still separate, and we can start healing some of these wounds on both sides because there have been people, like I said, there are people, our people have suffered in slavery, but there's also been some white counterparts, people who supported abolitionists and wanted to end slavery and lost their businesses, lost family members. They were attacked and they were killed, and some of them were lynched too. But history doesn't write about them either. So it's always the dominant culture or the victors who write the history, but let's step away from the standard history that we've been fed, and let's create a new history where we become one people and not always have to be separated, because at the end of the day, this is the United States of America. you know and I'm moving away. I will never stop being black. you know but however, um, there are people, and when it comes to being a Christian and showing the love of God, God is no respecter of person. He doesn't, God doesn't care about whether you're black or white. He measures your heart, and Christ is the focal point. But I'm not going to ramble on. Like I said, I think this has been a really good conversation. If you have any further comments, just leave them in the comment section. I promise I will answer every comment after I close the broadcast down. But again, we are always on um, every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And as always, Until next time, stay anchored in truth, grounded in grace, and courageous in faith. And may God bless you. I'm Deacon Joe Bumbry, and this has been Insight, Purpose, and Perspective. And we are out of here.